OC World is made possible by the generous contributions of the Marisla Foundation, the Keith and Judy Swain Family Foundation, Orange County Community Foundation, the Cordoba Corporation, and viewers like you. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to OC World. I'm your host, Joone Kim-Lopez. Imagine running for President of the United States without any prior political experience because you want to reform government and make it better. For Andrew Yang, he did more than just imagine. He actually did it. Although he fell short of his goals, he went on to write a book about his experience and vision in his book, Forward. Forward is also the name of the new political party he started with his supporters in 2021. Because for Andrew, it's not about the left or the right, but about going forward. In our exclusive two-part series, we'll get a closer look at the man who believes he has what it takes to bring our country together and make our lives better through inclusive and transformative reforms. Thank you for joining us, Andrew.
Oh, it's great to be here, Joone Kim.
All right. Yang Gang.
Yang Gang.
Yeah, what is Yang Gang and how powerful is it? Tell us about it.
The Yang Gang was the name that my supporters kind of came up with during the presidential campaign. I have to say it grew to hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Americans. We raised $40 million from almost 500,000 everyday Americans. And some of the high points of the campaign actually happened right here in Orange County. I think there's a video that went viral of me crowd surfing, and that happened really close to where we are right now.
So I heard about that. Have you ever crowd surfed before?
It had been a long time. I crowd surfed in my teenage years when I went to rock concerts.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of past experience, but it's been a while.
So were you a cool kid? You went to rock concerts, you body surfed?
Well, I was a very nerdy kid growing up, a bookworm. I'd skipped a grade, so I was always smaller and skinnier than a lot of my classmates. But then I kind of overcompensated when I got older and like really wanted to be cool, whatever the heck that meant. And so I did go to rock concerts. I started working out a lot. So there are high school pictures of me, so people can judge for themselves.
So how does this nerdy kid form this gang of millions of Americans and raise $40 million for someone who's never held a political office to be the president of the United States?
Well, I had a vision and also a problem to solve where I thought that Donald Trump's election in 2016 was based upon the fact that our economy was transforming and pushing millions of Americans to the sidelines, particularly those who used to work in manufacturing in the Midwest. And I have a lot of friends who work in technology, and I thought the same thing was going to happen in other industries, retail, call centers. AI is coming online. It's going to change a lot of things. So I started running for office on a set of solutions that I thought would help. And I had an instinct that other Americans might want something new in their politics because I figured, frankly, I would be drawn to a candidate like myself. So I figured there had to be someone else like me out there.
Well, so if you're before Trump and before all this, did you ever think about being the president?
My wife can vouch for the fact that I never had politics in mind, because if she thought I was going to run for office, I'm sure she would have never gone out with me. I had on a list of goals, try and help someone into political office, but I never expected to run. Also, I'm Asian, and my parents were immigrants to this country, and I don't think a lot of us grow up thinking that we're going to run for president or anything like that.
So what did you think you were going to be when you were growing up? Because you talk about sort
Wow.
of the Asian family, doctors, attorneys, and you went to law school.
I did go to law school. When I was a kid, I thought I might want to be a secret agent. So I
Oh.
thought FBI agent or something like that, which actually might dovetail into getting a law degree. But then I went to law school, was a lawyer very briefly, and then I started a .com business that didn't work out. I ended up getting bitten by the entrepreneurial bug. When I was a kid, I didn't know what entrepreneur was.
So some might say, while you've had different careers and you've been successful, to go from 0 to 100 with no political office to aspire to be the president of the United States, some might say it's foolish, some might say it's bold. How did you just make that leap? Why not go for a city council first? Why not take the traditional path to higher office? What made you think you could skip the line?
Well, I didn't really intend to win a particular seat. I wanted to help our country understand what was happening to it and solve the problem. I mean, if we could solve the problems that I'm concerned about with me not winning office, I'd be thrilled. And one of the goals I had, and you can't really talk about this when you're running for president, but my goal was to advance solutions that might help a lot of people, and that was my priority much more than whether or not I'd win or lose. The truth is, I think a lot of Americans are actually really, really tired of folks who end up trying to climb some ladder, and then when they're running for an office, you can tell they're just running because it's like the next step. I kind of think that that's leading us astray because you have folks who don't really have any interest in solving the people's problems. They just are in a career path.
So what are the people's problems?
Well, there are a lot of people's problems, and I talk about it somewhat in the book, and I talked about it on the trail. So the problem I'm concerned about right now, as you know, is that we're so polarized, where now almost half of Democrats regard Republicans as corrupt and a threat to the country, and shocker, the same percentage of Republicans feel that way about Democrats. And so you wind up with these two sides that are clashing and clashing. A lot of problems aren't getting solved. Things are getting worse, not better. And so I started forward to try and help correct our politics and line up what's happening with people and families and communities with what's happening with those in office, because right now people can sense that there's actually a massive disconnect between those two things.
Well, clearly there is a lot of evidence of polarization, the extremes. We've seen that January 6th, just to name one of the key elements that really let us know we're not getting better when it comes to our politics. So how do you think we got here? What causes polarization to be where it is at today? And has this happened before? I mean, are we at the worst point, or have we been here before?
People who measure political stress say that the only precedent to where we are now was before the Civil War in the 1850s. So that's not a good sign. Various scholars, that there's someone, oh gosh, his name's in my book, but he's a political scientist who's measured the political stress index. There are actually two of them. One of them is based in the University of Connecticut.
That's a big comparison to say that we're at that point. So what are some of the reasons?
What are the causes? So there are at least three layers of causes that most people can relate to. So the first is political incentives, where right now, if you're a Democratic or Republican member of Congress, the main way that you actually keep your job is by keeping your party's base happy. And so the party's base doesn't correspond to 51% of the population. It corresponds to roughly 10 to 12% of the population. So if you keep them happy, then you get to keep your job, because about 90% of the districts around the country are actually drawn to be uncompetitive.
What does that mean?
Well, what it means that a Democrat or Republican is going to win. And if people think about their own districts, they're pretty confident, whether, like I live in New York, and the Democrats typically have won most of those races. And here in California, you kind of know if you're in a blue or red zone. And so if you're a Republican member of Congress, your goal is just to keep the base happy. If you're a Democratic member of Congress, your goal is to keep your base happy. And keeping your base happy doesn't necessarily mean coming together and solving problems. So you have these political incentives that actually push people into the sides. And then you have media organizations that separate us into teams. And then you have social media pouring gasoline on everything and making everything into a life or death fight. And so if you stack these incentives on top of each other, you have tons of members of Congress who know they're not actually getting anything done, but feel like they're trapped. The good ones feel like they're trapped. The bad ones actually take advantage of the system and just throw fuel on the fire.
So you talked about the percentage of congressional incumbents keeping their seats. It's over 90%.
Yes.
And we've had congressional representatives for decades. And so when you said there are some who feel trapped, the good ones feel trapped, what does that mean? I mean, doesn't anybody want to keep their seats? Why would they feel trapped?
You know, what's funny is I talked to a guy who said that when he sits down with members of Congress, their main concern is keeping their seat. But then after they lose their seat, they're actually much happier. So you can take that for what it's worth. When I've been in DC, I mean, someone said to me, look, if you're a member of Congress in the minority party, you might as well be a piece of furniture. Because the fact is the two parties aren't talking to each other. If you're in the minority party, you generally don't even see legislation until it's up for a vote. And then your expectation is, well, like, no one cares what I'm going to vote, so I'm going to vote no. So all of the meaningful negotiations are happening in a handful of committees in the majority party. And so you just think, okay, I guess I'll just dollar for dollars and raise money and try and climb within my party and maybe wait until we're in charge. The whole situation, again, is just letting problems get worse and worse, where right now the American satisfaction level with Congress is between 20 and 28%. So imagine if you were a company where 3 out of 4 of your customers were unhappy, but then the reelection rate, as you said, is over 90%, so not much changes. And that's why Americans are getting more and more agitated and inflamed and polarized.
So you ran as a Democrat. Have you always been a Democrat prior to your campaign?
My first vote was for Bill Clinton, and I'd been a Democrat ever since. Also, I lived in a very blue city, and it's a place where you can't participate in local politics a lot of the time if you don't register as a Democrat. And I think a lot of people watching this are frustrated by the fact that you have to register with one party or another in order to vote. And that's one of the things Forward wants to change, is we want to make it so anyone can vote for anyone. You have more dynamism. California is actually ahead of the curve, where you guys do have an open primary and the top 2 get through in these congressional races. What we think would be even better if you had 4 or 5 get through, because right now with 2 getting through, it's 80% of the time just Democrat versus Republican anyway, and then the other 20% of the time it's Democrat versus Democrat. You might want some other voices and parties to get through, particularly when you look at Sacramento, where you have a supermajority of Democrats. And so if you're an independent or Republican, you feel like you have no meaningful say.
So for the layperson, I think the political incentive, it doesn't really bring people together, causing polarization. What's the second reason?
Well, the second reasons are media. And I love local media like this because you tend to play it straight. But if you turn on the cable news channels, I mean, you kind of know which team they're on pretty quickly. And over 2,000 local newspapers have died over the last number of years. So local newspapers used to be relatively balanced and up the middle, so I'd get news that way. But now you got rid of them, so what's replaced them? Fox, MSNBC, CNN, and Facebook feeds and social media. So the 3 layers are political incentives, which we're trying to fix it Forward. And then media incentives, because if you give people what they want every night, they come back for more. And then social media, where the more argumentative and sensationalist I am, the more clicks I get, where negative and even untrue sentiments on social media spread 6 times more quickly and powerfully than true and positive statements.
So you're going to incentivize better journalism?
Well, I talk about different things. One thing I think we should do is invest in local journalism, because
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, I draw comparisons to a local library, where they're some of the most trusted institutions in that town. You need some kind of local news source, because people otherwise aren't informed about who they're voting for at local races. You don't know what's going on in your community, and then you tend to get whipsawed into this national narrative.
So how do you feel that you were treated by the media during your campaign, and even now, because now you've been at this 5 years? I mean, you're not running for anything right now, are you?
No, I'm running to fix American politics via the Forward Party.
I love that instant infomercial ready to go. But we're going to talk more about that, because I'm really curious about some of the solutions and ideas that you have to make our country better, to make lives better. But going back to the role of journalism, how would you incentivize, how would you fund this model that is more objective? Because I know in your book you talked about NPR, you talked about PBS. We're a PBS show, and so we appreciate the recognition. But clearly there's competition for funding, and there's so many different avenues and channels, and you have some interesting ideas as to how journalism and objective media can be funded. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a public-private partnership where a lot of local journalism is concerned, and it should be seen as a domain for philanthropy at this point. We have to face facts that the for-profit business model of local papers died when Craigslist came up and took over the classified ads. There is a bill in Congress right now called the Local Journalism Sustainability Act that would give people tax credits and other incentives around local news. It's a no-brainer to pass, in my opinion. I have no idea why it's stuck. the goal should be to see local journalism as a public good, the same way we see town libraries, in my opinion.
Do you think that most Americans understand your perspectives about what's causing problems in our country, what's threatening our democracy? Do you think they understand?
Well, they understand it if you say it to them, which is one reason why I'm going around talking to people about it. But right now, most people just respond to what they're given. So if your local paper dies and you're like, okay, where do I get news? And you get news from social media or cable, then you just look at it. And unfortunately, as humans, we're kind of subject to tribal cues and conflict, where half of the news stories we get nowadays is, look at this person, like what a jerk, or look at this person, they're great. And so you just have this character drama. Meanwhile, people's day-to-day lives are not getting better, they're getting worse. Things are less affordable, schools, public safety, environment, you name it, which again is driving all of this agitation. And so the challenge then is to try and get people to take a step back and say, wait, why are we getting played and manipulated against each other in this way? And it's because the organizations that are doing it have their bread buttered this way. It's kind of like, if you think about it, I mean, it sounds, it sounds scary, but I'm a systems guy and an incentives guy. And you just have to follow how people are really going to get rewarded. Which is one reason why what we're doing with Forward, I think, is so important, is because you want to reward people for doing the right things. You want to reward people in terms of making good policy or legislation, and let them know that, look, like we don't want just the ideological tit for tat that doesn't actually solve a problem.
So that sounds, some might say, a little idealistic, all sort of incentive-based. I wanted to ask you, do you think that you're a better leader or a better politician?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I regard myself as not much of a politician.
But don't you have to be to affect these major transformative changes?
It's to be determined. I see myself as an entrepreneur and problem solver first and foremost. My dad was a physicist. My mom was a statistician. So politics isn't supernatural for me. I'm also a learner, so it's like I can figure things out and adapt. And we are at a point in American life, unfortunately, where people listen to people and personalities more than ideas. So what's funny is if you want to advance an idea, then you say, okay, I guess I'll become a personality and make that idea
So what's your
mainstream.
personality?
Well, hopefully my personality is the likable problem solver. I mean, that's what I fancy myself, but
You
I
also
don't know.
curse.
The likable, relatable problem solver,
There you go.
because most people probably swear every so often.
Well, you do it quite often. You do these talks. As I mentioned, I saw you live in New York, and it reminded me of those stand-up, those comedians that are celebrities. You start in the back, it's black and white. The guy out on the stage says, the man, the myth, the legend, and you come out and you're pumping up the audience, the light is dark, you're cussing, you're making people laugh. Do you feel like a celebrity?
Well, again, I'm trying to advance American life and society, but I do get recognized on the street a lot. So if that's the standard, then I guess I am a celebrity. My wife jokes that she can't take me anywhere because when we go someplace, it's like, hey, Andrew Yang. Be like, yeah, so I am. I mean, it's generally really gratifying because people are positive.
They're responding.
Yeah.
Connecting.
Though I will say, when I told my wife, it's like, hey, I think I might run for president. And she asked me, are we going to lose our privacy? And I was like, no.
You're like, sorry, Evelyn.
Yeah, and I said, especially not you, Evelyn, because I was like, could you pick out Amy O'Rourke out of a lineup right now? And she's like, I don't know. And I was like, no, you couldn't. Could you pick out Marco Rubio's wife? I was like throwing out comparables.
Sure.
But I was wrong, it turns out.
Well, you guys have become quite the team out on the road. So what are you doing to be a better politician?
I think that one of the learnings I had when I was campaigning was that the more genuine you are to yourself, the more people actually recognize and respond. So when you say, what are you doing to become a better politician? I think you just have to lean into who you are. Because if I had tried to be a better presidential politician when I was out on the trail, I'm sure I never would have left a mark. There were 21 candidates who were all there marching around acting like what they thought a presidential candidate was supposed to be. And most of them you can't even remember now. And so, it really was, again, something of an entrepreneur's approach where you look up at it and say, okay, what do we need to do? We need to make this debate stage. How do we get there? Get a certain number of donations and polling support. The same is true with Ford, where, this is what's natural for me. And there are people who say, look, if you're going to start this new movement and political party, like, you need some kind of really, really like evocative issue that people will get attracted to. And to me, I'm naturally most attracted to actually fixing the problem. If there's one major solution that I think will solve the problem nationally, it's something called ranked choice voting, which enables people to vote for more than one candidate, and it eliminates the spoiler effect. It rewards positive campaigning. It ensures the winner has a majority of support, where right now you can win an election with 25-30%, and like, how many people do you know really support that person? And it turns down polarization. To me, you could talk about an issue, but the fact is right now our political system doesn't care about what we think about those issues. It pretends to care, but it doesn't really, with 98% of them. But if you have ranked choice voting, you're genuinely aligning the incentives of our leaders with 51% plus of the public.
So let's break that down a little bit for our viewers. Can you explain exactly how that works? And
Sure.
if it's such a great solution, why aren't we all doing it?
All right, so let me go to where it's actually in practice right now so people can understand it. Alaska switched to nonpartisan primaries, a little bit like you have in California, with the final four getting through, chosen via, the winner chosen via ranked choice voting. So most of you have heard of Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin ran for Congress this past year, and she lost because they had this new system in place where she was nationally known. She got more Republican votes than anyone else, but because you had an all-party primary, she couldn't get over 51% of the general public. And so she ended up losing to a woman named Mary Peltola. So what ranked choice voting did is it enabled everyone to actually express their true preference. There were multiple candidates, so in a normal system, Sarah Palin probably would have won because she had like a very hardcore, let's call it 35% or 40%. By the way, this is how Trump won the Republican nomination too. He had 35-40%, everyone else had 10 or 15, and so he was crushing. But if you had ranked choice voting, do 51% of people vote for Trump at some point in their ballots? Maybe not. So what ranked choice voting does is it actually empowers the majority, typically people who are a little bit more moderate and reasonable and broadly appealing. Another thing in Alaska that people didn't pay as much attention to is that Lisa Murkowski might win via ranked choice voting, and she voted to impeach Trump in a state that Trump won by 10 points, which has been suicidal professionally for other Republicans who've done it. And so if you change the system to ranked choice voting, all of a sudden the will of the public gets expressed more clearly, and it disempowers the extremes that right now control way too much because of the party primaries.
So basically I'm choosing, this is my top #1 choice and this is my #2 choice.
Well, I'll give you an example, and this is, this is just something that people talk about. Let's say that some new candidate on the block shows up and says, hey, I'm running for office, and then people are like, oh, we can't vote for him because he's gonna mess it up for one team or the other. Ranked choice voting, it's like, well, you can just rank that person 1 and then your major party 2, and then no harm done. And so what happens is you can have minority parties come up and at least make an issue mainstream, and then one of the parties has to absorb it, because if they ignore it, then the other party can then adopt it. So you have a much more dynamic system that allows new ideas to emerge.
Did you have a lot of friends in the Democratic Party when you ran as a Democrat? Did these ideas resonate within your own party then?
Well, so this is the second part of your question, which is why aren't we doing this? And by the way, it's used in other countries. Australia uses it for all of its elections. The Republican Party used it to nominate a guy named Glenn Youngkin for governor of Virginia. So it adopts more electable candidates. But the reason we're not using it writ large, though it has been adopted now in more and more cities and now 3 states, is because if you ask a Democrat or Republican what they think about ranked choice voting, they then have to turn to their consultants or their team and say, what do I think about ranked choice voting? And then their consultants will say, look, it makes things more open, so we don't like it. Because if you're one of the established parties, you kind of know who's voting right now. You can control it. You can predict things. And if I say, look, instead of just having to keep these 10 to 12% happy, now you have to appeal to 51% of the population, you're like, well, that's so many. Like, I don't know. Like, it becomes less certain because it's more open and because the voters' will is more powerful. So that this is one of the truths about ranked choice voting, where I was shocked that I was one of the most prominent supporters of it, but I realized that the only reason for that is that if you're embedded in one of the major parties, it's harder for you to get behind.
So just real quick, as we're wrapping up, as you look out to the year ahead, what are you most excited about, real quick?
I'm excited about the Forward Party building up in states around the country. We have volunteer chapters in all 50 states, tens of thousands of volunteers, and millions of Americans who just want a new choice in their politics. They know that neither the Democratic Party or the Republican Party has everything figured out. 40 to 50% of Americans now say that we're independents. 62% say that we want a third option. And so we're building it with Forward. I'm going to be traveling the country with some of my colleagues to help make that happen. It's a lot of fun.
Great. Well, thank you, and I'm excited for our part 2. And thank you for joining us for this exclusive 2-part series with Andrew Yang, the man who ran for president, and he's got big ideas and big dreams. So join us next time so we can finish the conversation and hear more about the man and his party that he started called Forward. Thank you.